For the opening address on mapping the future of data analytics, we've got with us Dr. David Hardoon, Senior Advisor for Data and Artificial Intelligence, Union Bank of Philippines. Well, David is a Senior Advisor for the Data and Artificial Intelligence at the Union Bank of Philippines. Concurrently, David is an external advisor to the Singapore's Corrupt Investigation Practices Bureau in the capacity of Senior Advisor Artificial Intelligence, and to Singapore's Central Provident Fund Board in the capacity of Senior Advisor Data Science. Prior to his current roles, David was MAS first appointed Chief Data Officer and Head of Data Analytics Group, reporting to the agency Deputy Managing Director for the Financial Supervision. Well, David has extensive exposure and experience in both industry and academia and has been consistently applied advanced technology with an analytical mindset to shape and deliver new innovation. Well, thank you so much, Dr. David, for joining us today. And it is a pleasure to have you on the World AI Show.
Thank you very much, Bhavna, and thank you very much for inviting me here and for that absolutely embarrassingly wonderful introduction. Let me do the tradition now of the nowadays COVID of sharing my screen and kind of confirming that everyone can see it. Wonderful. So again, thank you very much. It's an absolutely pleasure to be here. I believe it is good morning for everyone. You're not quite sure which time zone people are jumping in. And the next 15, 20 minutes kind of very much wanted to talk to you about the mapping of the future of data analytics. However, before beginning and discussing about this, I wanted to first do two things. One is to just clarify a bit of the term data analytics, because unfortunately, I'm also to blame in interchangeably using the terminologies of artificial intelligence, data analytics, machine learning, data science, and rightfully so, one can say that, oh, but there are slight nuances and differences, agreed, but largely, in the end of the day, they're all in the same objective with your same underlying narrative. So I'm effectively an initial apologies if I do interchangeably move between the two. The second one, when talking about the future of this space, naturally, there is an immense plethora of possibilities from a more research-centric point of view, from an exploratory perspective, and one that has yet to be uncovered. What I was hoping to do today was to very much focus on the more operationalization aspect of things, on how, from an industry point of view, one can go about using it effectively. So to me, that's the focus of operationalization and mapping the future of data analytics. Now, just let me make sure my slides, there we go. So let me jump straight into it and start to me with the end in mind. When we think about the purpose and the objective of this entire and exciting world of AI, machine learning, data analytics, what is it really about? What are we trying to achieve from an industrialization point of view? Be it in the world of finance, be it in the world of medcare, insurance, education, and so forth. It is really about hyper-personalization. The term, if I apologize for borderline abuse of it, the holy grail of the segment of one. We want to be able to use the wide variety of techniques that are available through the various developments that have been done, and quite frankly have been there for quite a while. I mean, if you think about it, the world of AI, neural networks, machine learning has been there since the 1960s, 70s, 80s effectively. We are now at the point in time we can effectively use it. It is uncovering patterns about us. It is uncovering patterns about how we behave, the things that we need, when we need them, how do we want them, when we want them, how do we want it to be engaged with us, as well as having the ability of preemptive, even predictive ability of identifying those needs and when they may be required. So it is really about that. It is about creating the personal assistance, the hyper-personalization of bringing to you your needs when relevant and when required. And if I may give you a more realistic and pragmatic example, if you take the world of finance, ultimately, while the way financial elements and products and services have been created, the products have been created and then are surfaced, are provided to users, to customers, at least I don't believe that anyone wakes up in the morning and goes, I would really love a loan. I just, I had a dream and I think a loan is what I need. No, there is a moment in life. There is a necessity. There is a need. One is getting married and thinking about making a down deposit and buying a house. Potentially the children, planning for the future, education. There is an underlying need. And by understanding those needs, by understanding the patterns associated with that, one can go about and tailorizing those in a much more individualistic manner. Now, the power of AI, and combined with this whole premise of digitalization, makes it absolutely phenomenal, not just in providing those services to the existing demographics, which is already included in the financial services or the formal financial services. What truly makes it exciting is the ability of providing this degree of hyper-personalization, this specificity, this relevance to everyone, including those who may have not been privileged to the formal financial ecosystem. Because once you may, as a financial institution, you may have to hire hundreds, if not thousands, of relationship managers to engage the millions of people which are not banked. But through the augmentation of artificial intelligence, digital device, it's the ability of engaging with them and providing the relevancy that they still need at a cost-effective manner. So this, again, looking at it purely from an industrial point of view and working backwards, in the end of the day, this is the Holy Grail. This is the objective. How do we place the person at the center? How do we create that segmental one? And how do we not just personalize, hyper-personalize in a way that's relevant and manner? Now, in achieving these foundations, in this future of data analytics, I wanted to also spend a bit of time talking about the fundamentals. And I always like to half-jokingly analogize this into the onion, or peeling the onion. And the reason for that is because ultimately this world of data analytics has multiple layers. And with each layer that we peel, we uncover that there's another layer. And with each layer that we peel, we sometimes cry a little bit. Because at the end of the day, data is not just about data. Data analytics is not just about data analytics. It's not just about technology. So this is kind of where I wanted to go. And in the next couple of slides, really tease out some of those core fundamentals in the time that I have available to me. So the first things first, and it is one which I truly believe it is, in fact, one of the most important ones, especially with the concerns that people have with respect to the replacement that AI may result in when it comes to jobs and so forth. I like to address this head on, and this is one of the core foundations of the future of data analytics, the future of AI. First and foremost, I always like to refer to the term of AI, not as artificial intelligence, but as augmented intelligence. And it is about us thinking, how can we go about leveraging the underlying technology that's available to us with the objective of augmentation? Now, why I want to emphasize that is because in the end of the day, and just for reference, we actually did a study about a year ago within the financial sector, looking in depth into the impact of automation and AI to jobs. What we found, and by the way, the study is publicly available, but what we found, and in a way, in hindsight, it kind of is common sense, but as with anything, we needed that process of really teasing it out and evidencing it. AI is, or automation, is really about specific tasks. Now, when the tasks are truly automatable, well, one can argue about how much data analytics and how much AI is really in there, or whether it's just a matter of creating a script and repeating it on a recurring basis. Now, those may truly result in certain degree of displacement, but the virtue of data analytics, the virtue of artificial intelligence, or machine learning, as one would like to refer to them, is, as I was referring to in my previous points, it's about uncovering that insight, uncovering that understanding about the consumers, about the behavior, about their needs. If anything, that is resulting in more intelligence, in more intel, in more insight that needs to be analyzed, that needs to be digested, that needs to be understood in how to engage with. One shouldn't just take it wholesale and automate it from an end-to-end point of view. We need that human engagement, especially if you kind of break down in certain industries the potential implication and impact to us as individuals. So diving this in a bit deeper, if you think about what are the gaps, and let me start with the machines. The gaps, at least to this date, even though there are algorithms that are generating music and generating art, although of course we can argue how much of that is originality and how much of that is just imitation. One of the key gaps of machines is creativity. It's setting goals. It's common sense, although you may argue that even humans have gaps at times of common sense. But machines definitely have a lack of common sense. They may not be able to connect the dots that will be evidently obvious to us. Reasoning. When you have truly exceptional cases, rare ones, because remember, it is about commonalities, it's about patterns. And when those patterns don't exist, how do we deal with them? How do we uncover them? How do we manage them? These are the gaps of the machines. Whereas on the human aspect of things, and especially as age progresses at times, memory, attention, I have a low span at times. When we need to do large-scale search, we may be very, very good in identifying a certain topology, a certain pattern, and zooming in into a certain search space and uncovering that. But when we're dealing with a whole universe, when we're dealing with those millions upon millions of existing or untapped customers, are we able to handle that? Stamina, we need to sleep. So as you can see, we both have gaps, but then our gaps are things that the machines can handle quite well, especially on the memory, stamina, and large-scale search and attention. And we equally are the ones that address those gaps in the machine dimension, the creativity, the goal setting, the common sense. So it is truly about how do we bridge these two in terms of an objective point of view. This is a core foundation. This is a core fundamental, one which I strongly advise in terms of, from a planning perspective, in terms of approaching. Now, if I dive even a bit deeper, in terms of that future, it's also critically important in a realization that this world of data analytics, data science, artificial intelligence is not a vertical. It is a spectrum. It is a spectrum that touches from data to people with that world of modeling, or what we usually refer to as the data science and data scientists and so forth, smack in the middle effectively. Now, it is critically important to realize that it is an underlying spectrum and where it differs from what we may be used to, accustomed to. Because one may say to me, what's new with people? We've been dealing with people from the dawn of age. What is new with data? We've been having concepts of data governance, data management capabilities, tools, and so forth and so forth and so forth. But it is important to have that realization. And in fact, it even goes one step further into infrastructure, that there are certain nuances, there are certain prerequisites and requisites that one needs to consider when thinking about the world of data science. How do you go about in handling, managing data for the purpose of modeling and for the purpose of insight generation? If we call a spade, the vast majority of data collection that we have done pre this boom of AI had been either for compliance purposes, for audit purposes, for regulatory purposes, accounting purposes. It hasn't been for insight generation. It hasn't been for engagement, ultimately in a broad overgeneralization. So the design, the approach, the way we managed, the way we looked at it, the way we created, the way we thought of it had been along those lines. How do we now change it midway effectively? So it is critically important to think about from a foundational point of view, the data, or as I like to call it, data science engineering. The modeling aspect, which I won't delve in, which I think this is the common focus, And then fundamentally, the people. How is this understanding and knowledge translated, and how it is embedded from a foundational point of view? As I mentioned earlier, it is about using technology, using techniques on data to ultimately uncover insight and patterns about people. That will result in changes in how we engage people. It may even go down to a most extreme scenario of even changing the fundamental business process and business model. There's a necessity and importance of having these foundational in place in terms of accommodating and handling these as well as dealing with them. The other element, and I kind of half joke, and I couldn't think of a better way of representing it, and perhaps this is more of an evidence of my geekiness than anything else, of the mess that data is. And why can I put the title there as terms of governance? The reality of it is we are constantly needing to put in place order, governance, structure on this world of data, data science, and data analytics. And however, the reality of it, because of its dynamic and changing nature, it is as I like to call, a continuous mess or continuous chaos. This perhaps realization, understanding, acceptance isn't either to say, no, I'm going to make sure that all my pillars are in place from an engagement point of view, from a governance perspective, or completely giving in to the potential randomness and chaos. No, it's more of an appreciation of how do we balance the two? How do we go about an understanding that we will be dealing with a certain degrees of unknown? Will be dealing with a certain degrees of flexibility, modularity, but at the same time, there is a necessity of structure. There is a necessity of governance, because while I am sure you've heard this many times before, that data is the new oil, data is the new currency. By the way, these are all terms which I don't fully agree with for various other reasons, because oil is a perishable commodity. Once you put it in the car and you burn it, it's all gone. Data, on the other hand, doesn't. Just because you use data doesn't mean it loses value. Even to the extent I've heard the term, the data is the new oxygen, it's the new air. So it's with all of those terms, it's truly important to realize that in any case, data is a new central objective, a central exotic type of commodity that needs to be managed in an appropriate manner. And how do we approach it? How do we deal with it? Not to mention the new dimensions that are critical when it comes to the potential cultural, ethical considerations that we need to deal with. So I'll leave this one at this point, but like I said, I found that the fractal representation of continuous chaos and order, depending on the level that you look at it, was a lovely appreciation of that. By the way, and this is one of the risks of presenting from home or working from home. My apologies if you're hearing my newborn crying in the background. On that particular one, what I also wanted to kind of really dive in, and again as a foundation of the future, and this is really the future and how we should be approaching it in order to enable it, in order to make it real, not just a figment of our imagination or concept. Governance should be actually seen as an enabler. And to do that, there are three most critical components in putting those pillars in place. First and foremost, have a plan. And I know this may seem, again, common sense, and may seem something extremely obvious, but there are many, many, many times when data is simply taken as a, let's just do it and figure it out. And I always like to quote, or perhaps not quote, but reference the Kevin Costner movie when I like to say that, you know, in this scenario, just because you will build it doesn't mean they will come. So it is extremely important to have a plan. It's extremely important to have an underlying narrative of how we'll be managing and how we'll be approaching it, because data is limited, or data science, is limited by one's own imagination. It is a set of Lego bricks that you can build whatever you aspire to effectively. It is that strategy in terms of how do we want to go there. Secondly, and I was desperately trying to find a pictorial representation of this one, is honesty. What I refer to as honesty, or ability to acknowledge the situation, is data science, data analytics will uncover at times what is the reality, whether we are aware of it or not. From situations whereby the process may be inconsistent with the practice, whereby the behavior of your consumers, perhaps you find out that actually what they want isn't what you're selling, or how you're selling it, or how you're engaging, and so forth. Or the inconsistencies that may surface out largely within the data, and so forth. So why I wanted to emphasize this particular point, because this is actually one of the most difficult ones in assuring that this future of data analytics truly manifests itself. This is ironically where a lot of times things fall backwards. There is an importance of having an ability of gently and sensitively approaching it and identifying where we are uncovering new insights and new understandings, or where potentially inconsistencies may exist. Finally, is the importance of having a goal. Now, that goal could be abstract, could be high level, but at the end of the day, as I mentioned, data analytics, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and data science, I'll just use all the terminologies, is truly, truly about limited, with one imagination. So set a stretch target, set those objectives that one will be driving the organization with. And that's kind of why I wanted to emphasize as governance as an enabler rather than an inhibitor that may be apparent from the previous one. My last couple of slides, again, because these to me are important elements that one needs to take under considerations when thinking about the future. The future, when it comes to machine learning, AI, is data as a service. Is how do we go about in achieving and aspiring to that objective of hyper-personalization, when it is about me, if I may be narcissistic for a moment. But then how do you know about me? If I'm a financial institution, previously I would have privy to my financial dealings with an organization. Now with open banking, that is extending effectively. But it goes beyond that. It is about me, and perhaps my understanding about me is through my engagements on telecommunications, my broadband usage, how I shop for groceries, what do I like? I don't know. These are potential scenarios and examples from an external point of view, as well as internally within the organization. How do we move, and I kind of gave that quote about, from a data flow rather than data dumps? How do we, as we transact as an individual, as we engage, as we create patterns that are representative of us, now organizations that want to unlock that information, how do we create those environments that data is as a service, when data can equally flow centered on that individual and uncovering that relevance effectively? To me, this is one of the absolute core pillars of the future of data analytics, data as a service. Internally, because we may have those silos in place, as well as externally in creating that vast, the more comprehensive and holistic perspective of the individual. Talking about data analytics, it is impossible, and I guess will be very difficult not to talk about the risks and concerns from the black box. We've seen it many times. It has happened when we have, algorithms which had negatively discriminatory aspects and factors towards it that were undesired as well as unwarranted. It is extremely important that we address it, and to a certain degree, this covers to some degree the elements of governance, because this will continue, this will happen. Because in the end of the day, if you think about what is data analytics, as I was referring to earlier, it is about uncovering patterns. But these patterns are fundamentally correlations. These are statistics. These are not causalities. These are not cultural truths. It is purely what can be gleaned from the data that's available. This is why it is absolutely crucial, important to have an appreciation and have an understanding. Not saying that these algorithms will never go wrong, but to have the ability to put in place safeguards, to put in place mitigations when an algorithm and identify a particular pattern that it believes it is genuine, it's correct, it will deliver value to you as an individual. But when you receive that information, you may be offended, you may be discriminated, you may be disadvantaged. As organizations, we have a ever-increasing fiduciary responsibility to our consumers with respect to that. However, what I also wanted to mention about the black box is at times it may be taken too literally. That, oh, it's a black box, how do we open it up? Because sometimes it is not possible. The nature of AI, if you go back to its origin from neuroscience and psychology to a certain degree, is really mimicking our brain. So while I can ask you as an individual, how did you come to that conclusion? And you will walk me through that. It is very different from saying, how did your neurons in your brain fire in a certain sequence that has resulted in you coming to those set of conclusions? That's kind of the analogy. So it is a mindset. There are ways, there have been actually quite a number of best practices, guidelines, principles, and how to deal with it. But nonetheless, this is absolutely important and critical so that we are leveraging on data, we are leveraging on AI, and we're doing it in a governed, controlled, and safe manner. Last point, before I come to my conclusion, because I'm also conscious of time, just to highlight that to achieve this future, if we constantly do things sequentially, we may never get there. Because as I was alluding to earlier, data is a mess. It's a bit of a chaos. So if you constantly try to make sure that everything's in place, everything's right, everything's good, we may be doing that for eternity. So one thing to consider in terms of, most importantly, it is about operationalization. As someone who's helmed the role of data governance in multiple organizations, I've always used to advocate that when we get data, if we do not use the data, we should not be acquiring it, because data is a liability. Data is a risk if not used, if not only managed properly, if not used. So equally, we need to think about the operationalization. And as part of the operationalization, we need to think about concurrency. Yes, let's go bottom up from a data point of view and see those possibilities, making sure the safeguards, mitigations, methodology, governance are in place. But then fundamentally, we're working backwards from the operationalization of it and the necessity. And in summary, because again, apologies for going a bit slightly over time, these are the three takeaways if you take anything away from this underlying presentation with respect to the future of data analytics, AI, data governance, and machine learning. It is these three fundamental pillars. The first and foremost, it is about human centricity. It is about that augmentation that I was referring to. How do we make sure we better ourselves rather than replace ourselves? The second one is in achieving that goal of the possibilities of data, it is about open data. How do we achieve it? How do we create it? How do we achieve that ability of interoperability and reusability? Data is not oil. It is eternal to a certain extent. And then finally, and like I said, I started with this end goal in mind. It is about that hyper-personalization. It's about the segment of one, putting us at the center and providing a level of service, a level of productization that previously was only available to the few and select. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. David, for that incredible opening address, and the fact that you actually gave it your own definition of AI, from artificial intelligence to augmented intelligence. And what a wonderful way to cover it up. Thank you so much, David, for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you.